Hey church, Pastor Shane here with another community group discussion starter video. This week we continued along in the book of Acts. We were in Acts chapter 9, where we're kind of in a transitional section of the book. As you remember in the book of Acts, we have been kind of proceeding along as God grows and develops his church. It is thriving, it is developing, people's lives are being changed as they respond to the gospel. And they've had challenges along the way, persecution from the likes of Saul, but even in that case, God is doing amazing things. Saul comes to faith in Jesus Christ, and the person who is persecuting the church is now sharing the gospel as well. Well, in the section that we're in this week, it kind of transitions at the end of chapter 9, from turning our attention from Saul back to our attention on Peter. And it's preparing us for chapter 10, where God makes it very clear to Peter that the gospel is not just to go to the Jewish people or the larger descendants of the Israelites, but to the Gentiles as well. And so he transitions from Saul to Peter through this section, kind of showing what Peter is doing, telling more stories of how God is using the Apostle Peter to spread the gospel and confirming that message with the signs and wonders that God is doing. But as we read through those two stories of God's miraculous healing of first Aeneas, who is a man who is bedridden for 8 years and paralyzed, and Dorcas, a woman who made a huge impact in her community but died after an illness, after his healing and her resuscitation, we kind of stopped for a moment and considered what we could learn about God from these two stories and really all the stories of signs and wonders that we've seen so far. And we see this continued pattern throughout the book of Acts and really all the Bible, but it's just been very clear in the book of Acts that God has been using these signs and wonders to help confirm that his word is true, to confirm that the message that the apostles are preaching is the truth, that Jesus is the way to a relationship with God. It is the way of forgiveness through believing in his death on the cross and resurrection from the dead. And what we see is God chooses a certain way to kind of pursue his people with that message through those signs and wonders. Because God is all powerful. He could have shown his greatness to people in any number of ways, right? He could have made the skies, turn to lightning and thunder. He could have blotted out the stars. He could have made the day into night. He could have turned the river into blood. Things he's done in other times when he's judging other nations. He could have done it through fire and other kind of amazing supernatural displays of power. But instead, repeatedly, what we see God doing in all these ways in which he is pursuing people is that he is doing it through his kindness. That all of these signs and wonders that he chooses to do through the power of the Holy Spirit is all through healing and blessing and helping people, that God chooses to pursue them through his kindness and through his acts of kindness. And we talked about how we need to reorient our perception of God to make sure we're including God's kindness in our understanding of him. Yes, we need to understand his strength and power. Yes, we need to understand his holiness and revere him for that and be humbled by that and understand that, boy, we're sinners and apart from what Jesus Christ has done for us, God's wrath would eventually be turned on us. But that's not the way he chooses to reveal himself and to pursue us. It is through his kindness. And we need to include that in our perception of God so we get the character of God right ourselves, so we respond to him the way he has called us to. And I talked about responding not just in our own relationship with Christ and the way we see him and understand them just for our own lives and relationship with God, but also in the way we interact with the people in the world around us. That we, like Peter was, want to be used as instruments of God's kindness, both for the sake of our nation, which could really use a little kindness right now in a time of a lot of tension, but also just for the people we know, to be putting God's love on display for others through the kindness that we show them. We need to be a people continue to speak truth, continue to talk about who God is and who we are and who he's called us to be as a people. At the same time, we need to make sure we include displaying the kindness of God. That is how we shine a light in the darkness, the complete picture of who he is. And so I want you to talk about that. What's your relationship with God and his kindness, his power, his holiness? How do you sort those things out in your own mind? How's that affected your relationship with him? And eventually at the very end, kind of how do we become a church that is also showing the kindness of God to others, that we might be a light in whatever place that God has placed us? I hope you have a great discussion.